Valdis Dombrovskis, Madame la Présidente de la Banque européenne pour la reconstruction et le développement, chère Odile Renaud-Bassot, Monsieur le Ministre, cher Dmitro Kouleba, chère Alexandra Matvichuk et chère Laure Mandeville. Je retrouve beaucoup d'amis anciens ce soir. Welcome to Sciences Po et bienvenue dans notre belle institution. Allow me maybe to begin with a few words in French. I will be short before the conversation continues in English so that everyone can follow it as they should. Je suis extrêmement heureux d'ouvrir cette nouvelle grande conférence dans un format désormais consacré autour de 4 invités de marque qui nous font l'honneur de leur présence ce soir à Sciences Po. Je sais que, comme lors des précédentes rencontres, notamment récemment avec les premiers ministres du Danemark et du Groenland, pour un événement également remarquable, ou avec le directeur de la Direction générale de la sécurité extérieure, Nicolas Lerner, les places sont parties extrêmement vite, non sans une certaine frustration pour celles et ceux qui auraient manqué le coche. Mais ce soir, nous innovons avec un live diffusé en direct sur YouTube, et donc je salue également celles et ceux qui nous suivent en ligne ce soir. Je vous remercie tous de votre fidélité et pour votre enthousiasme aussi envers ce format donc désormais bien établi. Et je vous invite également à lire la déclinaison textuelle de cet événement qui sera en ligne comme il se doit sur notre plateforme Conférence, dont je dois dire que le succès ne se dément plus et va croissant. Je ne saurais trop vous conseiller de le lire comme toutes les autres productions de la série Made in Sciences Po Conférence. Ladies and gentlemen, tonight's discussion focuses on an issue that now runs through the political, strategic and moral life of our continent, which is obviously the war in Ukraine, 4 years after its beginning to date. It has been more than 4 years, obviously, that Russia has been interfering and then attacking Ukraine, interfering with Ukraine's sovereignty, and now launching a full-scale war with a neighboring country, which of course has shattered the European balance of powers. 4 years during which this war has continuously reshaped our security architecture, tested our economic stability, and perhaps, above all, challenged our relationship to the principles that shape the international order. This evening, we are honored to welcome guests whose path and commitments each reflect a different dimension of this historic moment we are going through. I will start with Dmitro Kouleba, who everyone knows here in Sciences Po, since he's an associate professor with our university, but before that, obviously, he was also a distinguished Minister of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine. During the first years of the war, you became, Dmitro, one of your country's leading voices on the international stage, carrying a diplomacy shaped by strategic clarity and moral resilience, and I can testify to the fact that you've been all over the world advocating for support to Ukraine, including in the global south, as people say, because you felt from the beginning that that was also one of the keys of the strategic balance in that conflict. Alexandra Matvichuk, lawyer and human rights defender, you were awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 2022 as head of the Center for Civil Liberties. Through your work, you remind us that behind political and geopolitical calculations lie human lives, real suffering, and the fundamental struggle for freedom and justice. Odile Renaud-Bassot, as president of the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, you confront a central question: how reconstruction can be conceived not only as an economic challenge, but as a political project for Europe's future also. And finally, Valdis Dombrovskis, European Commissioner and former Prime Minister of Latvia, you embody the European response to the crisis, a response that combines economic solidarity, political choices, and the redefinition of our continent's strategic priorities. I would also like to warmly thank Laure Mandeville, journalist at Le Figaro, who will moderate tonight's discussion and help make this the rigorous and open exchange that defines Sciences Po as its best. This is in many ways the signature of Sciences Po and of this format, to create a space where the world can be discussed collectively in all its complexities through dialogue and the exchange of ideas. An event as profound as the war in Ukraine demands exactly this kind of intellectual honesty. It forces us to hold together questions that do not always sit easily side by side: military support and the search for peace, solidarity and strategic lucidity, the urgency of today and the responsibility for the long term. It also reminds us that history is never over. This lesson may be particularly important for us Europeans, especially for the generations that grew up after the Second World War, who have become accustomed to peace. In the foreword of the French edition of his aptly titled book, The Future is Decided in Kiev, the great German historian Karl Schlegel even goes as far as to use the expression, that is a bit harsh, spoiled by peace. I hope that here at Sciences Po we are not spoiled by peace. We were indeed in the 90s and the 2000s the school that I call the school of happy globalization, and we embraced that reality, but we embraced it because it was the reality of the time. And what we do here is understand the world as it is, not to despair, but also because it's a way to start building the world that we want to build and the world as it should be. So tonight, obviously, you will confront the world as it is with its gravity and its solemnity, but also answer on that basis one key question, which is what needs to change and what can we do better once we've understood the world as it is. And because this is the question shared by everyone gathered here in the Amphi Boutmi, eager to hear your reflections, I will stop here and thank you warmly for being with us tonight. Thank you.
Good evening. Hello? Yes, okay. Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much, Luc, for your great introduction of this conference. I'm really glad to be here, first of all, because I used to sit as a student in Sciences Po, and it's good to be back, but more importantly, because I feel honored and thrilled to be moderating a panel of this quality in such an important moment. Why is it such an important moment? It's a historical moment, and I would say we will address it from 4 different sides. The first side is, the first way it is an historical moment is that we are witnessing a dramatic relapse of Russian imperialism and neo-totalitarianism. So this relapse has resulted in a barbaric war that we're seeing every day for 4 years, with producing an amount of fire and pain just unbelievable. And as Zelensky, President Zelensky said today in his wonderful address that I would actually advise you to listen to because it's extraordinary, he said, this is not stopping, this is continuing. And we're also witnessing a Russia which leads a vicious hybrid war against Europe and keeps spitting out through ideologues threats of nuclear Armageddon against our cities, against our capitals. The second reason why this moment is so extraordinarily dangerous is because we are witnessing a Trumpist America tempted to retreat from its role of security provider in this particular moment of danger. And the question, and trying to strike separate deals with Russia. So the question is, do we still have a valid security system in Europe? But there are 2 other elements which gives hope. The first one, of course, is Ukraine. And I would say that, the resistance of Ukraine, which is still, standing and has been, fighting for 4 years in an incredible way, is certainly the most important geopolitical news of the last few years. And I think that It's the message of Zelensky again when he said today, you Russians thought we were kneeling down, but we were just tying our boots. And the idea being that they were getting ready to fight. I think this resistance of Ukraine, its emergence of Ukraine as a key geopolitical actor, it changes everything. It opens a path, and the question is whether we, Europeans, will go along with them on this path. I think that Europe, as Luis has told us before, Europe has started changing its DNA. Europe was thinking in terms of a category of post-historical, time with no war, dividends of peace. And Europe now is starting to think in category of power, rearmament, and responsibility for its security. But this transformation is just beginning, and we're not sure if it's going to come to fruition. There are doubts, there are divisions, there are temptations to appease. And so the question is, will Europe become the formidable force that will help Ukraine? And for that to happen, what has to change? So I'm delighted to start this conversation, and I will ask you all of you first, very quickly, to remember this, the 24th of February 4 years ago, and to tell us what you thought then, and what actually now, when you go back, what is the thing that surprised you, between 24th of February 2022 and 2026? Thank you. Maybe you can start. Maybe we'll start from the Ukrainians. Please, Alexandra.
I remember 24th of February 2022 very clearly. I got up because someone knocked in my door. It was approximately 5 o'clock in the morning, and I was doubted who can come so early. My husband went to open the door, and I took my phone and saw dozens of missed calls. I dialed the last one, and this is how I got know that Russians started bombarded Ukraine, and the large-scale invasion began. I refused to evacuate, and I was in Kiev while Russians tried to circle my city. It was a dangerous time. I remember that we celebrated every morning as a victory because we managed to stand just for one more night. It was time when not just Putin, but all international partners were confident that Ukrainians have no power to resist to such enormous military threat. And I remember how international organizations evacuated their personnel, even international humanitarian organizations. They left us alone, but ordinary people remained, and ordinary people started to do extraordinary things. It were ordinary people who took people out from the ruined cities. It were ordinary people who helped to survive under artillery's fire. It were ordinary people who rescued people who trapped into the rubble of residential buildings. It were ordinary people who break through the encirclement to provide humanitarian aid, and suddenly it became obvious that ordinary people fighting for their freedom and human dignity are stronger than even the second army in the world. So the plan of Putin to occupy Kiev and the whole country in 3 or 4 days failed, and now we have the 4th anniversary of large-scale invasion. And let me conclude. I would never wish anyone to go through this experience, because war is horrible. But I think that Ukrainians are much more resilient than we even think about ourselves. And these dramatic times provide people in Ukraine the possibility to express the best in us, to be courageous, to fight for freedom, to make difficult but right choices, and to help each other. Because only when we help in each other, in that acute moment, we are aware what does it mean to be human.
These are very powerful words, and I fully subscribe to what Alexandra said. I met the 24th on the plane and in the car on my way back from the United States to Ukraine. And I was coming back with a very clear understanding that no one believes we are going to survive. Not a single soul in the whole world believes that we are going to make it. And I realized that we have to win the right. We have to win the right to be helped. So I went back home and did my job because there was no other choice. And the only thing that strikes me today is that the war is still raging. Yeah, but otherwise, I believe we are in the middle of a historic moment when the foundations of the world have been shattered, and Ukraine is at the ground zero of this process. So we don't know when the war will end, but we proved to everyone in the world and to ourselves that we are much stronger than we ever thought of ourselves and the world thought of us.
I remember this 24th of February. I was actually on the way to Paris because it was at that time a French EU presidency, and I was coming for Eurogroup, ECOFIN, and before that delivering speech in Eurofy seminar on finance primarily. And in the train was rewriting the entire speech because what was written before was not relevant anymore. And then in the next days in Eurogroup and ECOFIN, we were taking the first decisions on how to support Ukraine, how to deal with Russia, and how to deal with this entire new reality we found ourselves in. It must be said, it didn't came as a complete surprise because Russia was building up its military on Ukrainian border for many months. There was always hope that maybe it's a provocation, maybe it will not happen, but unfortunately it was not. There were already some aggressive moves by Russia in previous days, like recognition of independence of so-called Donetsk and Luhansk People's Republic and republics, and European Union already launched the first set of sanctions against Russia about this, and we already started to prepare the next sets of sanctions should Russia take further aggressive moves, and that came in then that we were able to decide in a matter of few days the first sanctions of the following the beginning of the war against Russia. And I also remember these first days of war, really every day waking up, the first thing was to look in the news whether Kyiv still holds. And then going back to work and seeing how we can help, putting together first financial support packages. It was, I would say, on very ad hoc basis as we had to react in 2022. And further ways how to help Ukraine. And indeed, It's 4 years and the war is still raging. So the question is, how do we step up our support for Ukraine? How do we step up pressure against aggressor Russia so that Ukraine can finally arrive at a just and lasting peace? Thank you.
So I remember very early morning in the 24th, and because very often I wake up at night and check my phone, and maybe it was 4 or 5 o'clock. I was in Paris also because of the ECOFIN, and I saw that the war started, and indeed, as Valdis explained, the days before we were all wondering what was going on, whether this will happen or not, and so forth. But then I remember my impression that we are entering a new world, because I've been raised in a world of peace and in Europe with the European ideal and so forth, and I think it was really like a real shock. And then at the president of EBRD, the day after, so on the 24th, in the course of the day, we convened a meeting of the board, our shareholders, in order to decide that we need to stop immediately any kind of disbursement to Russia. Russia used to be a very important country for EBRD, where we invested a lot, as we invested a lot in Ukraine. We already stopped in 2014, when the war on Donbass, we stopped any new project, but we could have, on previous project, we could still disburse some funding, and then immediately we took a decision which was never taken before, which is completely suspend any disbursement to Russia. And then at the bank, the big question for us was, okay, we are there to lend, we need to recoup our money and so forth, so what can we do for Ukraine, how we can support Ukraine in the war? And fairly quickly, we decided, first of all, to continue to disburse on the project we had, and to when we had clients that needed some funding and so forth, to give them some funding, and then to build a framework where we can get some guarantee, some support from our shareholders, and continue to finance Ukraine, continue to finance the private sector, continue to build infrastructure. And what was very impressive in that with the shareholders, we have a board of directors, 23 members representing our shareholders. Russia is represented, so they were, of course, completely isolated, but a very, very strong, unanimous support from all the shareholders to invest in Ukraine and to continue to support Ukraine, and that came very quickly. Even if at the beginning, I think the first few days of the war, nobody knew really, how things will turn out and whether the country will be really able to fight back, as we've seen. And I think there were a lot of military specialists saying it will not last long. It will be very challenging and so forth. But I think we've all been taken really, surprised by the nature and the strength of the resilience, of the pushback and so forth. And 4 years after, we are still there. But I think this is absolutely amazing and need to be acknowledged. And I think we need to be grateful for Ukrainian and humble in front of such a resilience, commitment and courage.
Thank you. Indeed, Odile, it took I think the American armed forces about a month and a half to actually believe that the Ukrainians were going to hold on and to resist. And up to that time, they were sort of delaying decisions. I don't know if you can confirm that, but from the information that I've had, it didn't happen immediately. The idea that they were going to support you. Maybe you can say a word, but I don't want to be too much onto this now. And I want to turn to you, actually, Dimitro Kuleba, and ask you how I want to talk about Russia and this Russia imperial relapse and the military situation. Do you see any proof that a peace is coming and that after the brutal aggression of Russia, things are going to change? Or do you see a Russia which hasn't changed its aims and is attacking and attacking on and on?
Life will certainly get better after the war ends. We just have to survive till that moment comes. And it goes for both human lives, but also a life of a nation. The future for Ukraine is completely different from what it was before the invasion. Ukraine will be part of Europe. Ukraine will be united in the perception of Russia. This is something we never had in our history. The country was always divided in its views on the relationship with Russia. This is gone. Ukraine will have a remarkable armed force and defense industry, which is a very good thing to have in the times we live, and we will be happy to integrate that into joint European capabilities. And finally, we will be the nation that survived the largest war in Europe since the Second World War, which is
it's not over. Can I remind you that it's not over?
No, when it is over, we will be the ones. It will be a very strong incentive and stimulus for the nation. This is how the philosophy of achievement is being shaped. Of course, every war comes with losses, but in my view, what will follow after the war will bring more benefits to the country at a devastating price, I have to admit, but we have to look forward. And today, you see, we are in a very tricky point, because Russia already faces enormous problems, but they're still insufficient for President Putin to recognize that he must concede. He must make concessions. So our task today is to make this push to increase these problems to the level when Putin will have to change his objectives in the war. And you can achieve that only in two ways. The first one is on the battlefield. You have to stabilize the front line. And the second one is to strip Putin of oil revenues, because this is what keeps the war machine running. This is achievable, but we need to do things differently. We need to be more focused and more comprehensive in the efforts that are being made.
Alexandra, I want to ask you, you know Russia actually quite well because you've been dealing, among other things, with prisoners of wars in Ukraine that have been tortured in many ways. And so could you help us dive into the Russians' intentions? How do you see Russia? What does it want from Ukraine?
Russia launched this large-scale war not because they want just one more part of Ukrainian land. It's very naive to think that Russians lost hundreds of thousands of soldiers just to occupy Avdiivka or Bakhmut, that majority of Russians couldn't find on the map. Russia launched this large-scale war because Putin wants to occupy and destroy the whole country and move further. He sees Ukraine as a bridge to Europe. His logic is historical, not transactional. He dreams about his legacy. He wants to forcibly restore Russian Empire. And empire is a center, has a center, but has no borders. Empire always tries to expand. This is the nature of empire. And that is why people in other European countries, they are safe only because Ukrainians are still fighting and don't let Russian army to move further. I totally agree with my colleague Dmitro about the point that there is no magic button, but it has to be a clear strategy. We must make price for war for Putin higher than price for peace. Because now the war is profitable. Because war provides Putin excuse for all internal problems and centralize his power. War also, unfortunately, became profitable for Russians. I will explain. During Soviet times, when Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan, Soviet families received coffins. It resulted in negative resonance in society and to Soviet withdrawal from Afghanistan. Now, in Russian war of aggression against Ukraine, Russian families also receive coffins, but they also receive money. And they satisfied. Because Russia pretends to be great, but Russia is very poor. A lot of people live in depressive regions, in unbelievable poverty. For them, to join the Russian army, it's the only existing social lift in the country. Because they start to receive money that they can't even dream in their depressive regions. Even more, my friends and colleagues, Russian human rights defenders, told me that if this person will be killed in Ukraine, his family start to receive money which this person could earn if he would work till the end of his life. So my Russian human rights friends and colleagues told this type of economy necronomy. And that is why our goal is to decrease the potential of Russian economy to feed this bloody war. And to end, let me remind that it's not just a war of one person. It's a war of Russian people. Unfortunately, my brave human rights colleagues in Russia are a tiny minority. Majority of Russians support this war. It's difficult to explain, but they have another way of thinking, being imperialist country. They literally think they have legitimate right to invade another country, to kill people there, to erode their identity, to steal their children, and to transfer everything into Russia.
Is it curable, this disease, this imperial? How do you cure that? I remember talking to Andrius Kubilius, who is the commissioner at the EU for defense, and he was saying in 1991, when Lithuania was attacked by the Soviet tanks, there was 800,000 people in Moscow supporting Lithuania. Where are these people? Why aren't they? A time will come when Russia maybe will change if it fails in Ukraine. What do you think?
Let me quote my Russian human rights colleagues, because part of them still in Russia and we work on a daily basis. I'm very grateful. They are very courageous. They help us to try to save dozens of thousands illegally detained civilians and prisoners of the war in Russian prisons. So once I asked them how I can help you, because all human rights organizations in Russia were banned, like independent media were banned. Part of my colleagues left Russia, part of my colleagues still there and doing their work, knowing that probably tomorrow they will be jailed as well. And when I asked them how I can help you, they answered, if you want to help us, please be successful.
Yes.
Because only success of Ukraine and defeat of Russia will provide a chance for Russian people to reflect about their imperialist culture, that probably in 21st century they can find Russian glory in something else, not in occupying another countries.
Yes, which I think it's an absolutely fundamental point that brings us to the remark of Dmytro Kuleba about how do we help Ukraine on the battlefield and how do we weaken Russia. So both of you have things to say on that account, because you are, you can talk to us about how do you weaken Russia economically, first of all.
But I wanted just to comment first on the idea that, in my view, what Russia really wants to destroy, so they have imperialist views and so forth, but they cannot stand having in their very close neighborhood a democratic society with civil society, vibrant civil society, freedom of thinking, freedom of speech, and so forth. And I think that's the core. I mean, having Ukraine, which they consider as so close to Russia, going into that direction after Maidan and so forth, I think that's what really is unbearable. And that's why preserving Ukraine's sovereignty, defending the role of civil society and the democratic nature of the regime is so important, because this could indeed have an impact on Russia ultimately. I mean, in terms of what needs to be done to weaken and to push Russia to negotiate and to compromise and so forth is, I think, doing more on the sanction side. And I think the EU package on the preparation, the 20th package and so forth, is very important in that respect, to tighten the fight against the fleet, the dark fleet, and so really reduce revenues in oil and gas, I think, because we see the Russian economy being really on a negative trend, and growth decreasing from 4% to 1% this year. The country starts to struggle really on the budget side. You mean the sovereign fund is starting to be depleted and so forth. So all the work done on the sanction and so forth took a bit longer in terms of impact, but I think now it really starts to bite, and pushing that further is, in my view, very important on the economic side. On the military, I'm not an expert in military, but I think accelerating on the protection side is absolutely fundamental, and more joint venture, building on the Ukraine capacity. But on the economic side, and providing support to Ukraine is absolutely fundamental. And the support has already been huge, but continuing to do that as long as it's needed, I think that's absolutely key.
Thank you very much. But Mr. Commissioner, we've been talking about this ghost float flotilla for years now, and so results are getting a bit more, more efficient now, but it's still a long way to go. So why is it that Europe, in particular, is not fighting more energetically to actually take on this Russian oil flotilla, ghost flotilla?
Indeed. As regards sanctions against Russia, so far EU has enacted 19 sanction packages. We are currently working on a 20th, which also foresees full maritime services ban on Russian shadow fleet and other measures in trade, in financial sector, in other parts. And all in all, we see that those sanctions are having effect. Russia's economy is slowing down and only sustained as a war economy. Oil revenues are 25% down. Liquid sovereign reserve assets are 50%, more than 50% down. So all this is having an impact on Russia's economy, on Russia's possibility to sustain war. There are also certain elements, I fully agree, that we could have and should have much more decisively with actions, with putting pressure against Russia, also with military supplies to Ukraine. Well, as regards sanctions, as European Union, we are facing our institutional limitations, principle of unanimity, and one member state is not agreeing to this, and there are some usual suspects, but then there are others not agreeing to that, to this. So also now, 20th sanctions package was meant to be adopted, certainly by today. It is not. We're still discussing. Okay, we were
so
able
it's
to...
only about Hungary and Slovakia slowing down? I mean, who else? Are there... It's the usual suspects, or is it more complicated?
Hungary is a usual suspect, but unfortunately it's not limited to Hungary, and quite often certain economic interests which are holding back taking decisions in this and that area among many EU
For instance?
countries. I will not now go in name and shame, but it's clear we need to continue put more pressure. So that is one element, and with the 20 sanctions package, I think we'll be able to really put this important additional pressure. And another element is that, sanctions are...
but why do we have 20 packages? Why didn't we start from the beginning with a stronger package? Is it, I mean, I'm trying to understand the kitchen inside. You know, why was it that we had to have so many packages?
That's exactly the point, that we needed to convince all member states to agree on all those different measures. And that's why, indeed, we could have and should have moved faster. For example, only now we are phasing out Russian gas supplies, and not even through the sanctions regime, but using other legal instruments. And it's 4 years into war. Of course, all in all, our supplies from Russia are massively down. We certainly we have taken the strategic decision. We're moving away from our dependency on Russian fossil fuel supplies, and we will implement and completely go out of this. But yes, we could have and should have done it faster. But then there is another element, that sanctions are more effective if international community applies them. But that's unfortunately not the case. It's mainly the democratic countries which do apply sanctions against Russia. So this allows Russia to find other alternative markets for its fossil fuels, like China. India was an important market. Now it seems that India will have to phase out their Russian oil purchases. So Russia has found alternative markets, and as we are implementing new sanctions, Russia is always actively finding ways to circumvent those sanctions. So part of the sanctions work is not only deciding, deciding sanctions and deciding new sanctions, but all the time implementing, enforcing, looking what are the new loopholes Russia is trying to exploit, closing those loopholes. So it's also a constant struggle from that point of view.
Thank you very much. Alexandra, I think you wanted to add something.
I call this approach drop to drop. When I open every time next list of this package of sanctions, I have this impression, oh my God, why it was legitimate for all previous 4 years. So this was my impression, because if we want to decrease the potential of Russian economy to feed this war, while we just aided drop to drop, it's totally wrong approach.
It reminds the approach on the military help, by the way.
All countries who prevent to make more decisive actions will understand it. Also, we have to do something to close back door, which Russia used to bypass the sanctions. I don't mean countries who didn't introduce sanctions. I mean another problem. When we analyze Russian rockets and drones, we still find Western components there. from Germany, from United States, from Switzerland. Why it so happened? These components are used for killing Ukrainian civilians because Russia can't win on the battlefield, and that's why Russia used terror against civilians as a way how to wage this war. When we go to bed every night, we have no guarantees that we get up next morning. The war is a lottery, and probably your door, your house will be hit by rockets this night. And I would like to end that it seems to me it's time to change the approach to what we are doing. Let me explain. When large-scale war started, European Union, United States told, let's help Ukraine not to fail. And Ukraine started to receive first weapons to be able to defend ourselves. And first real sanctions were introduced into force. And we are extremely grateful because it's helped us to survive. But it's also an explanation why Ukraine was waiting for a first modern tank for more than a year. Why Ukraine was waiting for a first modern plane for more than 3 years. Why we're still waiting for creation of special tribunal, for confiscation of Russian frozen assets, for helping us to hit piece of metal which cost 1,000 euro, drones, to close Ukrainian sky and to stop this terror. And I can continue, and I will tell you why. Because there is a huge difference between let's help Ukraine not to fail and let's help Ukraine to win. It's a huge difference. I can practically measure this difference in types of weapons, in speed of decisions, in gravity of sanctions. The problem is that for us, times is going differently than here in European Union. For us, for Ukrainians, time converted in numerous death in battlefield, in numerous death in deep prayer, in numerous deaths in occupied territories. So it's time to change approach, especially take into account that Ukraine is not beneficiary of international support. Ukraine, it's a strong contributor to European security.
Thank you. That's yes, I think what you say, we've entered into a very key, part of the discussion, which is how are we going to help Ukraine in military terms? And here you say, well, the West, the Americans and Europeans have always presented the situation as how do we help Ukraine not to fail? But the question is, does the West, do the Americans, I don't think so, but do the Americans, do the Europeans still think that Ukraine can win? And then it brings us, of course, to the question of what does it mean to have a victory. I think there is a huge problem here because, Russia is a nuclear country, and the argument they use to say no, Ukraine cannot win because you cannot win against a nuclear, superpower. So that's what they say. But the question, my question is, how do we now use the formidable potential of Ukraine that you just mentioned as a military power, probably the largest army in Europe and the most, combat-ready army in Europe, of course. What should we do concretely? Should we start, providing air defense, what you just mentioned, Odile? Where concretely should we, focus our attention to get to significant change on the battlefield?
America wants the war to end. Europe wants Ukraine to win, and Ukraine wants to win as well. The problem on the side of Ukraine and Europe is that we dropped the word victory out of our vocabularies. Remind me a speech delivered by Ukrainian or European leaders over the last 2 years with the word victory in it. And if you do not set, I mean, it works in human lives, in corporate lives, and in national lives, right? If you don't set a goal, you will never achieve it. So we in Kiev, in Paris, in Berlin, have to define what victory is and have to pursue it. And there is no one else who can do this job for us.
How do you define it?
Ukraine as independent, sovereign, and European nation, with part of its territories illegally occupied, but neither legally nor politically recognized. And Russia weakened to the extent that it does not dare to resume the attack. This is the definition of victory as of today. We made a big mistake in 2022 when we defined victory as resuming our territorial integrity. It was the euphoria that we got trapped in. People missed the point that it's a good thing to resume territorial integrity, to restore territorial integrity and put your flag on the border. But there was a flaw in that definition, because restoring territorial integrity did not mean victory. Russia would not raise its hands and say, okay, fine, since they are on the border again, we have to give up and accept their right to exist. No, that's not how it happens. Territories are not lost as long as the nation considers them, accepts the fact of the loss. France gives some beautiful examples from its history. But we have to be very clear that victory has to be defined and reintroduced into our vocabulary.
But that means a deterrence. I mean, when you say, victory will be when we can remain sovereign and free and having agency on our territory, and Russia is discouraged from attacking. That means deterrence. How do we achieve the deterrence? Seems to me that there are two different elements which are very important. One is keeping Ukraine as a nation alive. That means protect the airspace of Ukraine so that it can continue to function as a state, as a society, and continue its life. First thing, and the second thing, isn't it the fact that we are creating an alliance, a military alliance between Ukraine and Europe building up its power, which is so formidable that Russia will not attack. Is that what you think is right? I would like to have, of course, your opinion, but the opinion of the other panelists.
I think what Europe needs to do at this point is to define Russia as an enemy. It's very simple. You will see different types of policies, different dynamics of efforts once the Russia is defined not as a problem, as a source of threat, as a challenge, as an adversary, but an enemy. Europe is on its path to that. And Europe deserves to be commended for many good things it has done since 2022. And I agree that rewriting 300 years of history in which Russia was a part of the club, and it was a very good thing to cooperate with them, does not happen in a blink of an eye. It takes time. But the obstacle is here. The obstacle Europe is facing is the mindset. And this has to be overcome. And then the policies will come. You will see a different flow of weapons in Ukraine because you will be producing more. You will see a different level of a hunt after the shadow fleet. I appreciate the sanctions, but shadow fleet, the destiny of Russia's shadow fleet is in the hands of Europe, because Europe controls the Baltic and the Nordic Sea. And Hungary, luckily, is not a sea country. So they cannot block Europe's operations chasing Russian shadow fleet while it tries to leave Russian ports. Again, guys, it's here. Change the mindset and you will see a different level of effort. While I do appreciate everything that has been done so far.
Mr. Commissioner? I think, Mr. Commissioner, you have to answer. Do you believe that Europe is ready for that? I don't see it personally, politically. And I think that it's even going to get worse with the shift of European politics to, more and more populist parties, which unfortunately are, for many of them, supporting, not all of them, as we see with Meloni, but many of them supporting more Russia than Ukraine. So how do you see this situation?
First of all, it's worth noting that EU is already by far the largest supporter of Ukraine. So far we have mobilized some 195 billion euros of support for Ukraine, and with this 90 billion package of financing for this year and next, this distance with other supporters will be even much bigger. Of the 90 billion package, 60 billion will go for military support, and we'll have to work together with Ukraine to determine what kind of military support it will be, what kind exact weapons systems. All this work is very well advanced, and I agree, yes, that we need to obviously do more and we need to step up, but we'll have a very sizable package to actually allow for this to happen, and 1/3 will be budgetary support to cover the financing needs. So with adoption of this package, we'll have, in a sense, next 2 years covered, and also able to adjust our support, because if there is finally a peace or at least a ceasefire, also the priorities may shift to where the money and where the funding is really needed. But I agree that we need also to understand that the world has changed, the geopolitics has changed. We see that Russia, but also other authoritarian regimes are trying to assert themselves, and that, as it was said at the beginning of the debate, the aim of Russia is to rebuild the empire. And they are very open about this. Russian propaganda is openly talking about this. So from that point of view, it's very clear that Russia will not stop itself. Russia will have to be stopped. So it means finding a just and lasting peace in Ukraine, but it also means credible deterrence, both in Ukraine and in the EU's and NATO eastern flank, because while a strategic aim of Russia is to rebuild the empire, we also see that Putin always acts opportunistically. If he sees a chance to grab something, he grabs something. If he sees strong deterrence, he's not going there. And from that point of view, unfortunately, we allowed this situation to build up. In 2008, when Russia occupied 20% of Georgian territory, we did hardly anything. In 2014, when Russia occupied Crimea and started the conflict in Donbass, very timid sanctions. And I remember at that time some conversations where kind of Russians were laughing in our face, saying, okay, so what do we have now with this situation right now? So on the positive, we have Crimea. On the negative, a dozen of people or so will not be able to go to the West for a couple of years. With a balance like this, it makes sense to continue. And 8 years later, they continued. So it shows that really Russia also needs to feel the pain of its action, because it has never had to admit any fault or any guilt or having been accountable for any of many war crimes it has committed. So Russia has to be brought to this point of reckoning, and it has to be stopped.
Odile, please, and I'll come back to you, Alexandra, about impunity of crimes.
No, I wanted to come back to what ideally the speed of decision, the strength of decision, being very decisive, and what the reality of what happened, which was incremental, step-by-step measures and so forth that have been taken. I think that's also we need to take into account the institutional reality. I think all Western Europe were at the beginning of the war also very much worried about the risk of escalation and the threat of escalation. I think the calculus around that has probably changed because of what had happened in the last 4 years. But we should also acknowledge, without being complacent and so forth, that what European countries, what other countries have been able to provide in terms of support and the shift of thinking and the commitment is also, an absolute reality. I'm very often struck because, for example, we compare, we say we should have a Marshall Plan for Ukraine. What has been provided in terms of support to Ukraine is much bigger than any kind of Marshall Plan. So it's overall 200% of GDP when Marshall Plan was around 4% of GDP per year for the different countries. So I think that's a reality. Of course, it's not enough. Of course, I do agree that this has helped Ukraine to support, not to win the war, but the change of mindset also in terms of understanding that Ukraine now is, I like this Tusk quotation saying Ukraine should not thank Europe, we should thank Ukraine for this as a security provider and so forth. That's the truth, and that I think everybody understands that now, that Ukraine has been and is protecting Europe, and that we need to, that's also what should push us to accelerate and to support the EU accession of Ukraine. Because this, on the one side, is a key anchor for Ukraine in terms of the future of reform and so forth, but also for the EU, it's a key way to integrate and benefit from the Ukrainian capacities, in particular on the military component. And I think one last element I would like to mention on that is in a way, the progress made and the strengths shown by Ukraine now on the military equipment and the technologies of the war is, I think, we have a lot to learn from them, and we should help the country to build its capacity. The stepping up of the military capacity, production capacity, drone, protection against drone and so forth is absolutely amazing, and Europe needs to support that to develop and to grow and develop joint venture and so forth, so as to support Ukraine in the very short term and learn from that in the medium term.
Yeah, but again, concerning these joint ventures, we've been talking about that for about a year now, that Ukraine is an absolute, an extremely important, it's not a liability, it's a partner, it's an important military actor, industrial, in defense. So why is it not happening more quickly? That's one of my questions, is that why we don't see these joint ventures popping up, because the Europeans now are realizing they don't have a very strong security system in Europe. We don't know what is the validity of Article 5 at this point. We don't know, you were mentioning, Mr. Commissioner, the willingness of Russia to sort of go further, and we know that the Baltic countries are a potential target. There have been lots of announcements by special secret services of these countries, you know, being very worried about potential attack in the coming years. So I'm trying to understand what could happen. Is it the institutional? Is it really the integration into the EU that could trigger this sort of, wake-up call? Please, Alexandra.
I have a hypothesis to answer to your question. I think that the main problem is that it's only Russia who always been proactive. Russia committed something horrible, then presented it like fait accompli, like new normality, and pushed international community to reckon with it. And international community has no strategy. They just react to something which Russia committed. And I think that is why we are here in that point, because when you have no strategy, when you just react, it means that you place on the Putin's rules of the game. It means you will never succeed in this game. And this has already led to a situation that just 2 months ago, Putin told that he is ready for war with Europe. The question is whether Europe is ready to defend itself. And it's an open question. Let me illustrate it on the point of justice, because we want to speak a little bit about impunity. All this hell which we face in Ukraine, it's a result of total impunity which Russia enjoyed for decades. Russian troops committed horrible crimes in Chechnya, in Moldova, in Georgia, in Mali, in Libya, in Syria, in Central African Republic, in other countries of the world. They have never been punished. They believe they can do whatever they want. We must break this circle of impunity, not just for people in Ukraine, but in order to prevent a next Russian attack to the next nation, because impunity, it's a fuel of the war. And what we have at current moment, one example. Last June, Council of Europe made a historical step. The agreement between Ukraine and Council of Europe was signed to create a special tribunal on aggression. Why it's historical? Because in the whole history of humankind, we have only one such a precedent for punishment of the crime of aggression, and it was Nuremberg trial in past century. All other tribunals, which you probably heard, like Rwanda Tribunal, Yugoslavia Tribunal, special courts in Sierra Leone, I will simplify it, but it were courts where people were tried because they killed each other not according to the norms. So we must prohibit aggressive war as such. And it was just one precedent, this Nuremberg and Tokyo's tribunal past century. And it was an essential step to establish law and justice, but it's also established like a way of thinking that justice is privileged to winners. Because what it was victorious trial. It was trial where Nazi war criminals were tried only after Nazi regime had collapsed. And that's why this decision was historical, because we live in a new century, we must move further, and justice must be independent on the fact when and how the war will end. And now, half a year passed. May I ask why European countries are not joined to the special tribunal on aggression. May I ask for what they are waiting for?
Have you asked them?
Always. And I think that we have to decide. It's impossible to return to business as usual with Russia because the previous world has collapsed. It's not exist. Change is new normal. And if you want to create a future with justice, we must do decisive action. So I hope that France will join to special tribunal on aggression in near future.
We haven't talked really much about the institution and as a way to sort of change things. And I would like to go back to the question of are we seeing soon some kind of integration path, I mean, for Ukraine into the EU? Is it possible that we will have this sort of a reverse integration, as they call it, right? That means a symbolic integration of Ukraine coming pretty soon, as I understand, in 2027, and then a chapter by chapter, very rigorous, demanding path occurring. What do you say, Mr. Commissioner?
Yes, maybe before going into this enlargement question, I wanted to come back to a question we discussed before on whether Europe is ready to defend itself, because that's obviously a key question. And there, we are getting ready, and for European Union, it's a completely new area. European Union never had been working in an area of defense, therefore, in a sense, those are completely new initiatives which we are currently doing. But, for example, we have this 100 billion euros SAFE initiative to provide financing for EU member states to ramp up their defense capacities. We have added fiscal flexibility to member states to increase nationally defense expenditure and to reach the new NATO targets for defense of 3.5% core defense, 5% broader defense and resilience expenditure. But obviously we need to wisely invest all this money, deal with many inefficiencies, because so far EU has developed as 27 different militaries with way too many weapon systems, with way too many incompatibilities, with way too many duplications. So, and that's a new role we are now doing at the European Union level, actually to coordinate this defense build-up. So that not only we spend money, but we spend money in an efficient and coordinated way among European countries. We have targeted initiatives like on strengthening the eastern border watch. Just last week we came on a communication on the eastern border support, because that's clearly where the threat is coming from. So we need to enforce the eastern flank, and we need to have a proper presence of NATO troops in the eastern flanks, and that's important that it's actually happening. It's there, notably in the Baltic states, in Poland. But obviously there is still many things to do. And I would say that we are integrating from the onset Ukraine in this build-up of our defense capabilities. For example, Ukraine can participate fully, Ukraine's defense industry in our SAFE program. And yes,
at this moment? Okay.
Yes, and also when we are talking about providing military support to Ukraine, the previous package I was mentioning, we are integrating Ukraine obviously there as well, procuring also in Ukraine equipment for Ukraine and integrating it also in a broader European defense value chains, because there indeed Ukraine can and will be a very valuable partner, because Ukraine has the strongest army in Europe, it has to be said, and has the unique experience of modern warfare, which none of the other countries has. So, and that is very important Ukraine contribution to the entire European security architecture. Well, talking now about the succession process, well, we are looking how to go, so to say, beyond this chapter-by-chapter process, because this chapter-by-chapter process can take many years, if not sometimes more than a decade or so. But this is important anchor and important parameter also for a peace process, because this is also one of the reassurances and guarantees for Ukraine that Ukraine is becoming a member of European Union, and therefore it will require some non-standard approach from European Union, and we're looking at the possibilities how to do this, and in parallel we are practically already integrating Ukraine in the EU single market, and there are many concrete initiatives, synchronization of the energy grids, Roam like home for mobile connections. We are implementing a priority action plan on Ukraine's integration in a single market, and so there are many things we can do in parallel as well.
Yeah, but do we, thank you very much, do we, are we moving on concrete things like, for instance, air defense, the Europeans? Because for now, I mean, Ukraine has been protected by Patriots. Apparently, the Americans don't want to, the Ukrainians to build these Patriots under a license. So what is Europe doing about this? Is it an important priority? Shouldn't it be? And also I wanted to ask you, you are talking about this European pillar of NATO, but you feel, you are from Baltic countries. The Baltic countries traditionally relied psychologically and militarily and in all ways on America. America was the pillar of their security. So with this doubt now that we have about America, how do you see the future of Europe? Should it step up? Should it be more, you know, assertive inside of NATO, even if it means having some tensions with the US?
First of all, on those air defenses, obviously, that's an important part of this build-up, and there are also, again, targeted initiatives on the eastern flank, so-called drone wall. And there, actually, there are many things we need to learn anew. Because traditionally, you know, sending 1 million rocket to hit down 10,000 euros drone, no economy will sustain it. So also there, in a sense, is very rapid technological development. How do you actually deal with this air defenses? How do you deal with this drone warfare we are currently seeing in Ukraine? But this drone wall is exactly one of those initiatives. Then, indeed, the key right now for NATO is to strengthening and protecting the eastern flank, and obviously that means also Baltic states. And if we talk about the NATO military presence, it needs to be ramped up. It really requires boots on the ground, equipment on the ground, and it is happening. And it is not US troops which are there, it's German troops in Lithuania, it's Canadian troops in Latvia, and it's British troops in Estonia. Plus there are rotations of many actually other NATO countries being present in the Baltic states. But obviously, I would say also more is needed in this regard to provide this strong and credible deterrence. And that's when we're talking the deterrence in case of peace or at least ceasefire in Ukraine. That also there is a necessity, presence of international troops which can provide this deterrence for Russia also looking forward.
Odile Renaud. So Kaja Kallas says that Europe is a power that ignores it is a power. Do you agree? And when we were preparing this conference, you pointed out that there are different assessments in different countries about what should be done in relation to Ukraine and to defense more generally. So, but I was wondering whether the question of leadership is not actually, a very important one, along with the institutional question, the leadership in Europe, because America was the leader, was the hegemon. But now, who is? I mean, what countries are going to lead to sort of go, take Europe to build up this defense, to build up this relationship with Ukraine in a much more systematic way?
Indeed, I think it's a turning point for Europe, because what's going on in the world, the impact of the situation with the war in Ukraine, the situation, the situation, the evolution of the US being, more demanding on Europe to take care of its own security and so forth. All these create challenges compared with the premises on which Europe was built. It was not built as a military power at all. It was built as an economic market. And I think this requires a change of mindset, which in my view is taking place, and the affirmation of Europe as a power, as a geopolitical power and so forth is in the making. But it's also very challenging institutionally, because we come with, 27 member states and different vision, different history, so it's not going to be a smooth sailing, saying, okay, tomorrow will be a big power, Europe will be a big power, and so forth. There are a lot of tension, even only on the role EU should play on the military. Whether EU should have a role or not, there are some discussion, and the commission, now it's the first time we have a commissioner for defense. Did not exist in the previous commission. What is the role? Now, first time we have instruments in the EU for defense with a SAFE program, but then you also have member states who are saying, no, it's my competence, it's a nation based. So this will require a lot of work, a lot of discussion and so forth. But I'm optimistic that for Europe, because I believe that for Europe to have a weight and for European countries to have a say on the global scene, they need to be united. It's not by chance, because each country, is, not big enough or strong enough. So it's only if united and talking as European that we will have a weight.
I'm wondering, I understand what you say about the institutional question, and there are lots of talks about, different Europe becoming different clubs for different questions, the one who go further on defense or go further on another issue. But isn't this question of war and peace and life and death leads us to actually maybe for now circumvent the institutional question and build up some kind of alliance, concrete alliance, just to win this thing, to get to a resolution of the crisis. And
but that's in a way already what's taking place with the coalition of the willing. Preparing the security, who have been working on the security guarantee for Ukraine and so forth. It's some EU countries, some the UK being part of it, Norway. So it's beyond EU, it's European partners and other partners. So it's already this kind of dynamic where you have a group of countries sharing the same vision, the same objective, that can come together and act and have some influence and build something that is useful in the current situation.
Thank you. I think it will be good if we actually give some time for the questions, but maybe each of you, maybe in 1 or 2 sentences, would tell us what is the most important thing which has to change, let's say, in the coming year. That you would like to see happening in this coming year in relations to the war in Ukraine. and then we'll give a possibility to maybe the Ukrainian students to say something if they want, and to any people to raise questions.
Europe and Ukraine have done a remarkable job. The problem is that history is a very harsh judge. It does not judge you by the effort, it judges you by the outcome. And if you did your best, but you still failed, no one cares what you did. And this is the change that occurred in Ukraine in the course of the war. We do not judge ourselves by how hard we try. We judge ourselves by what we achieve. And as long as Europe does not change its approach from appreciating the effort to appreciating the outcome, we will be in troubles as Europeans, all of us, not only Ukrainians. This is the change that I want to see.
I think that we have to ask the very direct question: how it's possible that the Trump's year of peace negotiation became the deadliest period for Ukrainian civilians? The numbers of people being killed and injured in Ukraine increased in 31% in comparison with the previous years. So what's wrong with these peace negotiations? And I will tell you, we completely lost human dimension in it. Recent months, we heard a lot about natural minerals, Russia's territorial claims, geopolitical interest, even about Putin's vision of Ukrainian history. But we don't hear about people. We still have no idea what will be with dozens of thousands Ukrainian children illegally deported to Russia, separated with their families, put in Russian education camps, told, "You're not Ukrainian, you're Russian children, your families, your parents refused from you. You will be adopted by Russian families who will bring you up as Russians." What will be with dozens of thousands illegally detained Ukrainian civilians who literally dying in Russian prisons? I interviewed hundreds of them, as well as prisoners of the war. They told me how they were beaten, raped, locked into wooden boxes. Their fingers were cut, their nails were turned away, their nails were drilled. They were electrically shocked through their genitalia. One woman told me how her eye was dragged out with a spoon. Why it's not priority? Why politicians, I mean especially United States negotiators, discussed question of occupied territories like this is empty spaces? It's not empty spaces, I'm sorry. Millions of people live there. These people live in gray zone. They have no tools how to defend their rights, their freedom, their property, their lives, their children, their beloved ones. And Russian occupation is not just changing one state flag to another. Russian occupation means enforced disappearances, torture, rape, denial of your identity, forcible adoption of your own children, filtration camps and mass graves. This is Russian occupation. And peace talks, it's always a window of opportunity, at least to solve urgent humanitarian questions. So my wish and change which I want to see, I want human dimension return into political process. Because without human dimension, we will never find a path to sustainable peace.
Mr. Commissioner.
Yeah, so what needs to change? Well, we need to step up. That's what needs to change, and I agree with what Mr. Kuleba said, that yes, we did lots of effort, but where is the outcome? What is the outcome? And what is the outcome we want to achieve? So, and to achieve the outcome which is just and lasting peace in Ukraine, obviously not forgetting human dimension, we need to step up support for Ukraine, pressure against Russia, allow Ukraine to negotiate this peace from the position of strength.
I fully agree with what had been said. I think that my personal wish is that I think we continue and in all countries and to be focused on that. And we are not distracted by other events, other priorities and so forth. And it's not becoming something that, we've been 4 years in this war and it will last forever and so forth. But have the strength to take the actions that are needed to come to some ceasefire, peace agreement that will give the countries the capacity to rebound, to recover a normal life and get out of this terrible situation.
Thank you very much, Odile. We still have a few minutes for some questions. I'm sure there are many. So please, if you can stand up. I see a young Ukrainian student with a flag, so please. You can get the microphone, present yourself.
So, first of all, I'm really grateful for this opportunity to see you and to listen from the first source about what really happens. And my name is Alexander. I come from Kyiv. I'm doing an exchange here, and for this conference I specifically came from Hans. And also, lots of good things have been said today. Specifically, I would like to relate to what Mr. Kuleba said about the memory for the territories. I have the Ukrainian flag as well as I have this flag. Let me show you. Anyone knows this flag? Yes. Donetsk Oblast. So, why I have it with me? It's because my mother comes originally from Donetsk, and it really hurts to see what has become to the region, which is 70% occupied, mostly devastated. And the city of Donetsk, which itself has been occupied for 12 years, and until quite recently we maintained connections with the relatives there, but we decided to cut them off because they were no longer sustainable. The people there were either tortured and sent to the basements or brainwashed to the extent that we cannot hold the conversation anymore. But still, we have the memory in those territories. We wait until the occupation just to be able to visit the graves of our relatives. And until this memory is persistent, I believe that Ukraine can restore its territorial integrity. And about the questions, could I ask two questions? One to Mr. Kuleba and the second to Mr. Dombrovskis. Yeah, first. As our moderator said, Ukraine has been emerging as a global actor. And Ukrainian operatives have been spotted in Syria, in Mali, in Sudan. So the question to you, Mr. Kuleba, how do you see the future of, let's say, global Ukraine? Do we really have the potential to expand this operation even further? And if it's not classified information, could you give some details on Ukrainian involvement in Mali and Syria? There have been some visual proofs, but on what their involvement is based, whether any agreements or something like that. Yeah. And the second to Mr. Dombrovskis, you have spoken about the European sanctions towards Russia, but I feel like not enough have been said about cutting the loopholes which are used by Russians to avoid those sanctions. I mean, since 2022, it's become obvious even in statistics that Russians used third countries. For example, there were economic statistics that highlighted the export of cars from Germany to Tajikistan and from Tajikistan to Russia, which coincidentally escalated like 30 times or something. Could you please elaborate on the actions which are taken to prevent Russians from exploiting third countries' aid to avoid the sanctions, like secondary sanctions or possibly any other means of pressure? Thank you.
Today, Ukraine exports only two commodities, assets, whatever you call it. It's agriculture and security. As weird as it sounds, a country at war exports security, because when we speak about how Europe can benefit from Ukraine's technologies, we export security. When you mention the cases, we export security in the way we understand our interests and regional interests. The problem with agriculture is that the state of Ukraine does not hold monopoly over agricultural exports. It's a market. Therefore, it cannot be fully instrumentalized by foreign policy, as it is the case with, for example, oil exports. This is not something that we can do. But the state does hold monopoly on military issues, and it must build instruments which will allow it to export security services to the countries according with Ukraine's national security, foreign policy, and national strategy. The risk here is to become an exporter of only one service, which is security. This is something that needs to be avoided. But for Ukraine to be able to export something more, it needs to overcome the consequences of the war. It needs to rebuild. It needs to become stronger. But in the nearest future, grain and security will be our main articles of export. I don't know whether we were there. Things just happened the way we wanted them to happen, and that's good, right? Thank you.
Yes, so on this second question on sanctions, circumvention and closing it. As I was saying before, it's in a sense it's a constant struggle. So one thing is what we are having is well, what we call high priority battlefield items list, meaning dual-use items which we are finding in Russian equipment in Ukrainian battlefields, and then tracing back where this equipment comes from and how it has reached Russia. Well, one important observation that some 70-75% of those items are reaching Russia via China and Hong Kong. And we had been engaged in extensive discussions, negotiations with Chinese authorities on this, but progress, unfortunately, is limited. So what else we do? On one hand, we have introduced responsibility of European-owned companies, because if those are like European components, then we foresee sanctions against our own companies if they are knowingly engaged in sanction circumvention. We also introduced what is called requirement for companies dealing with those dual-use items and things like this, to introduce what's called no Russia clause in their contracts, that they are contractually obliging also their partners with whom they are doing this trade in dual use, that they contractually oblige themselves to make sure that those items are not reaching Russia. Right now, we have for first time in the 20 sanctions package proposed to use what we called anti-circumvention tool, prohibiting exports of certain equipments, kind of radio ICT equipments, which somehow all too often are then found in Russian drones. And we had introduced this anti-circumvention tool in one of the previous sanctions packages, so now we will be using this. And we are engaging with countries in question, including Central Asian countries on those topics. We have a dedicated sanctions envoy, EU sanctions envoy, whose main task is to do only this, to deal with implementation of sanctions, to deal against circumvention. I would say the progress with different countries is mixed, but there are quite a few countries which are more forthcoming, so to say, in discussions behind closed doors, and they are willing to discuss publicly. And we have managed to block quite a few channels just through quite the diplomacy. So there's different work strands, but it's a constant struggle, as we are actively putting sanctions and trying to make sure that they are efficient. Russia is actively seeking circumvention, so we all the time need to keep up the pace to see and deal with different channels. On financial services, also on financing, how different financing for those transactions is done. We proposed sanctioning now more Russian banks and also sanctioning certain cryptocurrency exchanges and venues like this, because we see that lots of financing flows are now going through the cryptocurrency. So this is also part in our 20 sanctions package, also then showing to those different cryptocurrency exchanges and operators that we will also go after them if they are involved in this sanctions intervention.
Okay, maybe two more questions, or maybe we can take these three questions, but please be very short in your questions. And maybe you all give the questions and then we see who answers. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for the speech. I would like to, Mr. Koleb, I would like to go to your point about making European countries to see Russia not as a problem, but rather as an enemy. And we can see this happening actually on the eastern frontier of the European Union. I mean, like Poland, Lithuania, all those countries already do it. But if we look on the other side of Europe, we see a completely different thing. Like, I don't even mention Hungary. Like, here we all agree that there are some issues. But like on the Munich Security Conference, for example, the Prime Minister of Spain said that, quote, I mean, not direct quote, but we should spend money not on arming ourselves, but on fighting poverty. So like there is no sense of urgency, and there are lots of issues to like kind of push this agenda through. And I want to ask you and your experience as a diplomat, how is it possible to do it? How is it possible to persuade Europeans to think that Russia is not, like a temporary thingy, but actually as an enemy? Thank you.
Hello, my name is Nastasia. I wanted to ask you, what gives you hope? We've mentioned so many difficult things today, and I want to ask what keeps you going and helps you keep working on what you are doing. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Diana. I'm here actually on the certificate for the young refugees, so I'm actually the refugee from Ukraine, from Kiev, and I have a question about, you were saying that the politics and the world actually now changing, but what we can do with the case of USA, where President Mr. Trump, he's changing his mind all the time, and like he has unstable politic view, and how it influence on Europe, and also how it can I don't know, help or on the other way for Ukrainian to win. Thank you so much.
Your last one here, yes?
Thank you very much for this wonderful conference. And I have a question. Ilya Snegur from Odessa, Ukraine, M1 International Security here in Sionspol. And it will be the question for Professor Kuleba. Russia today once again renewed its nuclear rhetoric and longly muted for a long time, if to be fair. But it's very fragile and psychological question. But how serious Russian nuclear blackmail was, and how Ukraine and our partners reacted on it. And it puzzles the question, was Russia on the very verge of launching the limited conventional nuclear strike on Ukraine in case of successful counteroffensive operations, or it somehow did signal it on the diplomatic level, and it affected some Ukrainian foreign policy approaches? So to hear from the hand experience. Thank you.
Okay, so who wants to, and maybe you answer this question about the nuclear threat.
I know we are running out of time, but I would really ask you to take one more question from a non-Ukrainian student, because people will think that Ukrainians somehow corrupted you, so that you only give the floor to them. Yeah, 4 against 1. Okay. No, but answering your question, people. I will be very, very short, right? Because there are many nuances, but I will try to keep it short. People like Prime Minister of Spain, whom I actually like, he did some good things for Ukraine, will change their views only after first Russian drones will hit targets in their territory. You can do whatever you want, but they will hold their line until the very last moment. The biggest test to Europe today, is not its defense capabilities. It is the test of unity. So when Putin attacks a country in the east of Europe, he will not be doing that to reoccupy Latvia or restore direct link to Kaliningrad. No. His goal will be to prove to everyone that the promise of unity in the EU and NATO is a lie. And then you will do the job for him. You will collapse. So the best way to explain this point to people like Prime Minister in your internal in-house debate is about that. The more disunity we demonstrate, the more tempting it becomes. Today, think about this. Today, the question of an attack of Russia on an EU country is not a question of why. It is a question of why not. Because he sees perfectly, and he doesn't need Europe anymore. This is, I think, the point that many are missing. Peter the Great of Russia turned Russia away from Asia to Europe. Vladimir wants to go down in history as Vladimir the Great, who turned Russia back from Europe to Asia. And since you're not buying his oil, you're not buying his gas, he despises you only a little bit less than us. So we are in the same boat. And this what should define Europe's approach. We are in the same boat. But there will always be people who will be talking about schools until the very end, fighting poverty until the very last moment, until the first drone hits the target.
Thank you. So there were other questions. If you want to answer the other questions, can you? Yes? About hope, I think there was a question about hope.
I will finish with this. I want to take question about United States. I think situation with United States is just a reflection of the negative global trend that's going on in the world. I don't know how historians in future will call this historical period, but the world order based on UN Charter and international law has collapsed. This system was created past century to prevent wars and mass violence, but now just stolen. It's reproducing ritualistic movements. For obvious reason, even my smartphone has an expiration date. The system has never been reformed. And last year, we made a significant step to the past. I mean globally. I remember that moment when I saw in result of voting in General Assembly of United States, in one line, Russia, Eritrea, North Korea, and United States. I have never ever think that I will see this line in my life, but it's happened. And what does it mean? That we make the step to the past, to the world which is based not on rule of law, but on the will of strongest. And let's be honest, this past wasn't great, because world with will of strongest, it's very fragile world. To be a strongest, it's also not very secure position. You can always prove that you are on the top of this hierarchy of violence, and that is why the world of strongest, it's always the world of wars and mass violence. And now, several words about hope after this. Yes, we are in global storm. Not just we people in Ukraine, we globally. Because we're losing freedom in the world. 80% of people live in non-free or partially free society, and people in well-developed democracies started to exchange their freedom for something else. We can lose freedom.
Messieurs, nous vous informons que le bâtiment va fermer ses portes dans quelques minutes. Merci de bien vouloir commencer à vous diriger vers les sorties. Ladies and gentlemen, we inform you that we shall close within a few minutes. Thank you for starting to go to the exits.
Well, you can finish your sentence, I think.
So, our future is...
Mesdames, messieurs, nous vous informons que le bâtiment va fermer ses portes dans quelques minutes. Merci de bien vouloir commencer à vous diriger vers les sorties.
We're coming.
Ladies and gentlemen, we inform you that we shall close within a few minutes. Thank you for starting to go to the exits.
So maybe you finished your sentence. I don't know if it will start again, if you start talking. Yes, please, Alexandra, let's try.
It's like ear alarm in Kiev. Very annoying when you are in the middle of something and they start to speak. I think we must define the word hope properly. Hope, it's not a confidence that everything will be fine. Hope, it's a deep understanding that all our efforts have meaning.
Well, I think it makes a great ending to our conversations. I really want to thank you all for this panel. It was very rich, very interesting, and let's hope that, as Volodymyr Zelensky said today, be brave like Ukraine.